So welcome everyone.
Put it.
Can you hear me okay? Yes, welcome everyone. Can you hear me okay? I first became familiar with Elizabeth's work while visiting Women and Their Work. That day I was taking a walk and I stopped here and I was amazed by this installation and by each one of the elements in it. And that's how our connection started.
Very recently.
Yes, very recently.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding the shadow in your work. When I first came to see Elizabeth's installation, associated with darkness, with shadow, and to me that's the place where I go to find healing. Would you be willing to talk about it?
Yes. So the entire forest itself is a common theme of the shadow. I also think that one thing that Shahzia and I have in common is sort of thinking about roots and rootedness. And a lot of people have come into the exhibit and found the mirroring of the trees to feel like root balls in the soil. And also I think the shadow of, within these stories, the nymphs are these creatures that inhabit two worlds. So they're part of this world, and they're also part of this dark shadow world, and they're sort of inhabiting both at the same time, but they're also like cracking open and transforming, and they have kind of a place in both at this moment. And also in the painting for this exhibit, like all of the things are moving and evolving. And so I'm trying to work with the shadow in each of these moments, where the stag, for example, you could say represents the shadow or the darkness. And I think it's really easy to go right there and see that as the great shadow figure. And so I think what I'm trying to do in every one of these moments is take the duality of what we think of as shadow and reject the duality in every moment that I can, and kind of spill out of that duality into some other space. And with the stag, for example, instead of seeing it as this negative shadow, it's all these men in my life, men that I love, and men that are problematic, and men that I admire, and they're all merging with one another. And they're merging with one another, and the paintings are merging with one another, so that there are these spaces where Rilke is becoming, Putin, or Putin is becoming Walt Whitman, or my brother, or my son, and not rejecting those spaces either, not rejecting the paintings that are in between, where the painting doesn't make sense, and the painting's not resolved, and the painting is neither Rilke nor Putin, but both. And so I'm always trying to kind of leak around what it means to have a shadow, and kind of not have a definition, and kind of spill around what it means to have shadow.
Would you like to say anything to that, Shahzia? To the concept of the shadow. I'm also thinking about the back, and this is something that I discuss with my students all the time because I teach a class on walking. For most of us, we're always projecting forward, and many of us don't even think about the back. And so shadow,
I
the
think
back.
the shadow is very much about the in-between space. So I would say that it's the transitory, or even the interstitial. And when I think of it, I think of the shadow as obviously connected to the human, but it is also something that connects us with the outside world. And in a broader sense, you know, you can think of it, everybody that is caught between something. So it could be between cultures, between practices, between histories, between artistic vocabularies. It's this interstitial space. That's how I kind of think of it, but because it's also the unknown. And it could also be the place between power or powerlessness or migrant or citizen or women and power. So it's also this thing that lurks. And that's probably, it's less literal in my practice, but it is really the importance of that space that is unfamiliar, that is unknown, and that's a marker of like exposing the fear that lurks in that.
Yes.
So I think that's how I see it.
I think that like one of the things I wanted to talk about with you today, Shahzia, and I think even in the concept of monsters, what we tend to think of mostly are the creatures at the edges of things, and the creatures at the borders, and the creatures that have been placed there by culture to be at the borders or to be on the other side of the borders. And I think what I'm more interested in that, instead of that kind of monster, which I think like classically these nymphs are those, you know, on maps, it's like, you know, beyond these borders there being monsters kind of situation. But what I'm more interested in is the monster that refuses the boundary and spills beyond the boundary. And I think that in my practice, what I'm interested in is like paintings that spill beyond being paintings, and bodies that spill outside of their boundaries of being bodies, and our bodies collectively in the world refusing to participate in the boundary, refusing the duality, and continuing to spill. And I feel like this process has been a real adventure in that, because every time I think you start practicing what it means to spill or to reject dualism, you come up against kind of a stronger force of maintaining that duality. And I feel like it feels like a continual I guess what I'm trying to say is when I try to spill or like reject a boundary, I find those boundaries come back around to me and try to take me in again. And I even try to participate in it myself because clarity is needed, and because there's a lot of language out there to like have a definitive place to know where you are and how to talk about it. And so I think like you spill and then there feels like this great resistance to not spill. And for me it feels like a real challenge to keep spilling and keep leaking. And this whole thing has been kind of me trying to live in that spilling, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And with that comment, with that narrative, I would like to ask about bodies in your work, because as you said, Elizabeth, and as I intuited from your share, bodies are not, do not have borders. There's this misconception that my body ends where your body begins, and bodies are porous. They're always interacting with each other, and not only with each other in terms of soma and soma, but also in terms with the earth and trees and forests and all kinds of creatures. What is the role of bodies in your work? I know that's central to both of you.
Do you want to talk about that, Shahzia?
Sure. So when I think of, I often center women's narratives in my practice, and when I think of that is also I think like, okay, how are women often spoken about, and how do women speak of themselves. There's always a big divide there. So in terms of like the idea of the women as something which can be a counter narrative. So what is it as a counter narrative? So often what I'm thinking is like it's a counter narrative to something which is extractive. So then I start to think about everything which is extractive in nature, which could be, you know, which is also about natural resources. It's also about planetary destruction. It's also, obviously, it's capitalism. So it's this engine which is extractive, and then the female or the feminine or the space of abundance is its counter narrative. And that's how I position then the protagonist in my practice.
Yes, and I think that's why I'm drawn to mythology and fairy tales, because I think these feminine archetypes and narratives are things that you can always ask questions and work with. And I think the very act of regenerating those ideas for yourself becomes this very powerful thing. And I think clearly it's very powerful in the world too. And I think too, for me, this myth in particular has been seeing Artemis as a gaze destroyer, and seeing her as, you know, I've been saying like composting the stag, not killing necessarily, yes, but bringing the stag back to earth, using the trees as mycelial models for this delusion of separation, and seeing her as kind of this ultimate reminder that when we walk into nature, when we walk into the divine, we are forgetting that we are already enfolded within it, that there is no approach, really, that the approach itself is an illusion, that we're already folded into that embrace. And I feel like I was hoping this could feel like that, like an embrace and not an approach. And I feel like, you know, one of the things that drew me to working with Shahzia was that we had in common. And in the past, my last show in New Orleans was very much about taking the story of Eve and Eden and kind of shifting that and making that something that included me.
Yeah,
and
I think like some of these stories behind them, like I think often the themes of similarities are themes of struggle, themes of conflict, whether it's memory, whether it's migrancy, whether it's the mythos of tradition. These are basically the ultimate frames against, you know, against which experience unfolds also, whether it's death and its opposite life. So in that spectrum, how do you cull erasure, or how do you re-examine, or how do you bring back a more perspective which can be a counter to the hyper-masculinized spaces that we are forced or often exist in. So that's how I think of it. It's like there's so much play then, almost like, you know, you can, in reinserting those narratives, or even like re-examining them or rereading them, or reimagining them.
Yeah.
There is that telling the story from the perspective of the female is always going to give a different perspective to a story that has been living for decades or centuries.
Yes.
There are trees in both of your work, trees or roots or connection to the earth. And I think that trees are central to this installation. And I'm thinking about the two Genesis narratives and how the tree is the source of consciousness. Whether it's an apple, some people, you know, for me, it will be a mango. Some people have argued that it's perhaps a banana. but the tree stands at the center of acquiring consciousness. And that's key to the development of quote-unquote humanity. Can you say something about trees? Why roots? And we already talked about connection, but beyond that, this idea of also the tree being connected to a woman, the tree working in complicity with a woman, as in the Bible, in the Genesis story. And from there on, unfolding this narrative of becoming conscious and being expelled from so-called paradise.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting to kind of link the forest as my protagonist with the tree of life or the tree in Eden, and I think they're all linked, and I think they, I think, you know, that links back to the shadow we were talking about earlier, but I think it's that mirroring too. It's the shadow, but it's also this ancient, nurturing presence. And I think it was interesting to take like the trees from many, like to think about there's trees in every culture and every religion and every, whether it's like inanna tree or the lotus or so many trees, and I like sort of all these trees as being our guides, I guess.
The Bodhi tree under which Buddha sat.
Yes.
So thank
yes.
you for mentioning that.
Yes.
So there's all these connections to trees, and I don't feel that trees have been centered to the point where we rethink and give value to that narrative, because at least from the Christian Judeo-Christian perspective, the tree plays a key role in the development of civilization, cultures, and humanity at large. Mm-hmm. And it's this like standing person that doesn't move, that doesn't go anywhere, but witness the passage of time and how things move in the world.
I will just share another perspective, which is often that when I play with this idea of appendages with a body, or people often see them as roots, I'm thinking less literally of the tree or the roots of the tree, because the female in my iconography is not looking to root herself to a specific environment. So instead, then the roots are rooted back into her body. So this self-rootedness becomes this idea, which is a parallel, but it's a self-rootedness where the women can carry their roots wherever they go.
I love that.
And this way, it's like the female is very buoyant. She's self-sufficient, she has autonomy, she doesn't need assimilation. It's like, so I was playing off of this idea of rootedness, or the paradox of rootedness, that, or maybe called the fallacy of assimilation, or of being foreign. So there's that other twist that I just wanted to add.
Yeah, I like thinking of it as buoyancy, and I think where I was coming from was much, maybe not, I was kind of not thinking about autonomy. I was actually thinking about kind of the lie of autonomy. And even though I like the idea of like the buoyant female self, I think that buoyancy and that kind of rooted back into oneself is also rooted out into the world and connected, and that there is literally no other, and there is ultimately really no self, and kind of the dissolving. I'm sort of really interested in the dissolving of rootedness and the dissolving of identity and the
Elizabeth, I definitely think like that's so true, right? It's like this notion throughout literature and in art that the female, there's always this thing between the feminine as the monstrous, or then the abject, or the immense, or the vulnerable, or the visible, or the invisible. It's always this sort of, like the border is very present, or the boundaries are very present. And I often think that that's what happens when those boundaries start to melt. Yeah. That's when sort of the fear that is lurking becomes visible, and often women are markers for such for that moment. So I feel like what you're saying is really can be seen in so many ways,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the literary tropes as well,
Yeah, I think
around this idea of the female.
yes, I think that
It-
we're more
it's
comfortable
kind of-
with making the monster at the border, on the other side of the border, and then to refuse the border, you become a monster, and then instead of saying I'm becoming a monster by refusing the border, you continue to spill that as well, and like keep spilling and keep leaking. And I don't even know what that is, but I know that the more I step into it, the more I see the power that wants to pull me back into claiming borders and claiming other. And I'm just trying, I want to invite myself and everyone into leaking, you know.
There's two things that I am gathering from your comments. And one is about the propensity and the power of roots to do away with borders. Because you can plant a tree on either side of a border and the roots don't really care.
They don't
The roots
know.
find their way
They're indiscriminate.
through the border. Yes.
They're unconditionally nurturing. They're unconditionally nurturing to things that will not necessarily serve them or nurture them back. So they nurture all the things within the ecosystem because they are modeling this whole non-othering factor. And so I think that's, I really love that as my protagonist, but I also, when I think, the more I think about that, the more I like to take that on as this body. What does it mean to take that concept on? And I think it's really, I want to be strong in that, and to be strong in not othering, and to be strong. What does it mean to be strong in leaking? What does it mean to be strong in not resisting borders? And I feel, I don't even know what that means, but I feel the need for it. I feel the need to not fall into the very easy place of knowing where I am and where you are. What does it mean to not even be interested in where I am and where you are? To not see them as, I'm not approaching you, you're not approaching me, we are here, we are one. In a very, gritty sense, not in a I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, and I would like to retake the conversation, if that's okay with you, about monsters.
Oh,
monsters,
yes.
Because the monster keep changing shape
Yeah.
and configuration.
Shapeshifter.
And I'm thinking about the monster now, in my opinion, as the immigrant, the monster as the person who's crossing the border or who was crossed by the border, because in some cases, and I'm thinking more specifically about some of the Mexican communities who did not cross the border crossed them.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the monster as the trans person, the monster is always taking different configurations depending where we are politically, especially in this right-wing time wave that so many of us, so many societies are experiencing worldwide. How do you see the monster taking new configurations for you, for both of you? And I know that one of your pieces, one of the comments was when your piece was going to the University of Texas at Houston, some of the comments were related to horns and braids. So how are monsters evolving in your work and reshaping themselves?
Well, I think...
I keep saying that whenever there's an allegory in the work that deals with women and justice, or the tensions that are between, from inside and outside around women and power, that's when everybody starts imagining,
Yes.
you know, anything that's and I think in that sense the art is basically exemplifying, it's mirroring this type of fear or the fissures that are there in the country.
Yes.
And yes, I think all of these things pertain to it. But in terms of like, if you were asking like where in the sculptures in particular, all the iconography in that project that I did with Madison Square Park, which has now traveled to Houston, that the entire like the iconographies are coming from the courthouse. There's the Appellate Division courthouse overlooking the Madison Square Park, and inside the courthouse are incredible murals and decorative programs. So all the judges' benches have these arms. The chairs have arms, and all the arms are adorned by ram's horns. And I had taken clues from the courthouse, so that's already in the Christian iconography, in that sense.
Yes, and I think again I think when you come up against this kind of resistance, it's just a reminder that you're kind of in the right place, and it's a further invitation into not entrenching in the other. It's very easy to do, and it's kind of what I'm just talking about with the stag and that multiple eyes and all the different kinds of men, and not being able to say the stag is this or the stag is that, and not being able to say that we, you know, that the people who are resisting you are other as well. You step into it, and then you find this resistance, and then you have to find a bridge to the resistance. The resistance is not other. The resistance is some mirror, some shadow of what you're expressing. And so how do you invite yourself even further into bridging to that shadow, that very real shadow, and seeing the humanity there? And not saying, okay, now I'm going to monster you, shadow that's real, that's right now. How do I not monster you? I'm the monster spilling. How can I not make? How can all of that leaking boundary embrace you as well? And what does that bridge look like? How do we have that conversation? Because we've had all the other conversations, so I think it's important.
How do you see Earth in what you do? And there's this tendency to relate Earth, and please note that I'm not saying the Earth, but referring to Earth as a person. There's a tendency to refer to Earth as mother, and I know that that's key to what you do. I see roots and appendages in your work, like trying to reach the soil, the dirt, mud. How do you see Earth in your practice? And I know that people like I'm thinking about Linda Montano, Annie Sprinkle, Linda Montano has also worked with the concept of Earth. But I'm also thinking about people like Annie Sprinkle and Beth Steven, who have been trying to change the paradigm of the Earth as mother, and instead they talk about the Earth as lover, because the mother has been abused over time. There's this idea that the mother is always giving, offering. There's something to take from the mother. So who is Earth in what you do? And where is Earth in the midst of these appendages trying to reach down into the ground, into death, and the process of decomposing and the process of renewal?
In my work, I think the feminine in nature perhaps is a hope for environmental, catastrophe. So it's more as women as agents of change, and then, it's no less literal in terms of the roots looking to seek a host. The roots, there's a self-containment. And I think that gives me, as a painter, ideas around creating forms that are buoyant, that can float in space, that are self-rooted, self-contained. So that's how I can respond to that. But of course, there are many different works, and in different works, there are different ways in which I would engage perhaps the landscape. But I'm thinking of one painting in particular, Kindred, where the notion of the sea or the oceanic space, that's sort of space of even the space around the globe, is played with writing and repetition and layering, and then that becomes rote, and that becomes hand, and that becomes gesture. But then if you take an image of that work and you compare it to the human clutter in space, it's an uncanny resemblance. So it's kind of different ways of bringing attention, to how it's what human clutter is happening outside of the earth, literal earth as well.
I like thinking of mother I like thinking of lover instead of mother. I like the kind of, I think that feels like spillage. I think that feels like this ongoing relationship that's maybe not one. I mean, I don't think mothering and, I mean, honestly, like these creatures are, this is me and this is my daughter. And one of the things I was trying to think about was like my eyes and this creature start when I'm a baby and then go up to now, and hers evolve and blink. And when I was making them, I would have them hug each other, or like I would get their fingers to entwine with one another. And it was very much a way in which I could be with her and like actually participate in her body, and she could participate in mine, and we could grow up together and kind of not, and then ungrow together. And that feels like a form of sacred entanglement for me as a mother. So I say I love the lover image, and I do. I think that's beautiful. But I guess I don't really have a problem with Earth as mother, because the more I think about it, I don't think it is. I guess, again, see, like there's that wanting to put like a label on it where it is entanglement, and it is spilling its boundaries of what it means. And so that's very much what these creatures are about. They're in two worlds, but they're also my daughter and me trying to reach each other's worlds or be involved in each other's skins and worlds. And paintings also, what does it mean for a painting to hold hands with another painting, What does it mean for when I'm moving these paintings around that I can enfold myself literally in them? That's not really talking about the earth exactly, but it's responding, I guess, to the idea of mother. I feel in some ways like I want to back up and just say to Shahzia that, I had this opportunity 3 years ago to apply to Anderson Ranch and the mentorship program that I'm in with you. And we maybe should have started there, but the reason I applied is I was a big fan of yours, and the reason I was a big fan of yours is because when I was in college, my whole thesis was on miniatures and Trey Richelieu, and I made a book of hours, and my thesis show was about, like, I draped the whole building in coffee and tea-stained sheets, and I made all these places that you could experience this book. So I was very interested in your miniatures, and then I was, as time went on, interested in how you were taking painting and spilling the boundaries of painting, spilling the boundaries of bodies, and going into film, and sort of you as resisting all of these mediums and enfolding all of the mediums. And so the name of the residency was, I don't remember exactly, but it was like painters who are trying to kind of wrestle with what a painting is and trying to get outside of the boundary of what a painting is. And so I applied for that. And it's been, I would say more than anything, to be in the presence of someone like you that I respect and love so much. I love your work so much. To have, like, attention is love. And to be in a cubicle in Snowmass and have you sitting next to me and responding to my work and has been such a gift, really, truly.
Thank you. And, for me also to see how much to learn of this project, this installation. Unfortunately, I'm not there. I was looking so forward to viewing it, but to have seen you conceive it and bring it all together, every aspect of it, different conversations and all the different parts. I love how the painting grounds the work, but then the painting is also able to, collaborate with other ways of experiencing image. And I like between spaces that you have very successfully created in each object. And then, of course, all of them coming together to tell different stories. And I think there's so much potential there because I feel like it can have different iterations as well. And that's also like a testament to how there's never like a clear beginning and an end. It's an ongoing thing.
Exactly.
And that's always been sort of the spirit with which you were working. So having seen that and seen you work so hard and also see all the sort of labor that has gone into the making of these has been such wonderful, ways of like understanding, how things actually get created. And I think that's really important in any class, but especially in Holly and my class, is to really let the process dictate everybody's direction. And you've embraced it so well.
Thank you. Very good. Should we wrap it up?
Yes, but before we wrap it up, can we talk about, if you wish, the concept of the mentor? Because that's something that I feel that needs to happen more. I teach, and I feel that some of the younger generations are struggling to know how to reach out to mentors. And I grew up with this idea of mentorship, either mentoring others or being mentored. And it's interesting because all of my mentors, I can say maybe all, had been women-identified people. From, as I said, Linda Montano to Annie Sprinkle, Beth Stevens, and on, and starting maybe with my mother and my grandmother. So this idea of mentorship and growing roots. Who are your mentors, Shahzia? You're muted.
So much of, say, my mentors are like radical feminist poets. I love reading. I love like Audre Lorde. I love Szymborska. I love younger people like Salma Sharif. I am, looking at Fahmida Riaz, Parveen Shakir. But oftentimes they are poets. And they are like incredible thinkers. And I feel like a lot of that's what I see has been always a very strong guiding light, is to understand how poets can crystallize a moment in time and then keep it timeless as well. And I think that's what I derive from thinking my work as that of a poet.
I love that. And I mean, poets for me are very helpful, but it's one thing to like read all these people that inspire us and have that kind of nurturing us, but then another thing entirely, especially for someone like I live in Texas and I just sent my children off to college, and to be in that position where I don't have a lot of feedback, and to be thrown into, like y'all modeled it like a low residency MFA, to have that kind of, like I said, presence and attention from you and Holly. I was already working on the idea of Treespell, so I didn't, mentorship for me in this respect was not so much that you were, you know, actually helping with my concepts or whatever, but it was that you were there and you believed in it and you were seemingly delighting in it, and your delight fed my resolve and my confidence, and that was a kind of radical support that I almost didn't even know I needed, but then once you gave it to me, it's very moving to experience, and I do think we need more of that. We need more, and probably in a more, I mean, it's wonderful to have programs like this, but how do you have it in a more grassroots way?
Well, I would say that, you know, during COVID in particular, I was getting reached out by a lot of lots of artists and young artists and students. So we were hosting just like very much letting people share their work, and I hosted conversations.
That's beautiful.
Just on social media,
Mm-hmm.
letting everybody, different age groups and different practices and different students from different parts of the world. It was very exhausting, but it's also very, very easy. Like,
Yeah.
one takes time, and I think being generous is you have to be generous. Like, being generous is part of both equations. It's
Yes.
not the generosity of the mentor, but also I think students need to have that generosity for themselves and for each other as they build a sense of community, and to give themselves time to seek out the most wondrous and creative and exciting things for themselves that will sustain their interest, and that enthusiasm is important. So I always feel like, you know, you have to give yourself time, and then you will find like where you have to create your mentors. Mentors are always around. They are lurking. You just have to like let them
To be open to it.
visible to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Do you feel like we should we wrap it or open it up to questions, or what do you think?
Yes, maybe let's open up the floor for questions, and Sasha, it's wonderful to hear your thoughts and to just to be here with you, even if you're joining virtually. Thank you.
Thank you for that generosity, Shahzia.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah. Hi.
I had a question just on the topic of mentorship. I was curious, Elizabeth, how you first encountered Shahzia's work, and as someone personally who's interested in seeking out mentors, how does that process just sort of happen organically as you continue researching and seeking it out, or how would you recommend someone start to try and seek out the right mentors that are the right fit for?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Shahzia, she was asking, the question is, how did I come to know your work, and how can she here in Austin find mentorship? And actually, I think actually Chris Cowden, see, that's full circle for you. I think you introduced me to Shahzia's work many years ago. So look at what you got going. I don't know, but I don't know how you find it. I think you have to be open to finding it and looking everywhere and being part of the art community, and which means, you know, having people over and being part of conversations. I think it's hard at openings and things like that, but I think I wish there were salons. Like, we need to bring back the salon, right? And I think there are some in town, and maybe some people here in the audience know of them, and maybe you could, you know, share that with us. But the idea of the salon is a good one. I don't know.
If I may say something, just ask. I remember being at Yaro many years ago, and I was working on pilgrimages, and something told me, contact Linda Montano, and I just emailed her. And we started, now we have a 20-year relationship. Same thing, I was teaching a writing workshop, and I found a book at the library, and I contacted Julie Davy in California, and she actually came to the South Bronx to co-teach with me. Ask, just ask.
You're like radically listening to yourself, and that's, I think, a huge part of it, and acting on those intuitions. Anything else? Yes, Alyssa.
That was so lovely.
Yeah.
And I'm so inspired. I was taking notes the whole time. I just want to go to my studio and read and think and like.
That means a lot from
scramble
you.
stuff. So, speaking of that, I love that you mentioned Linda Montana, by the way. She's so wonderful. And looking at your background, Shahzia, know the background that's on her screen.
Yeah, she's at Pace,
So,
I think.
all of you had such interesting ideas and thoughts. I was wondering if each of you could talk about maybe a book or two that you have been reading lately that contributed to things that we were talking about today. Because I love books, and there were so many ideas.
The question, Shahzia, is what books, like book recommendations, and I actually have a book reading list on the platform as you go out the door that informs this show. And since this show, I've been reading Art Monsters by Lauren Elkin, which actually informs much of what we're talking about today. And I'm reading Jennifer Higgie's new book, which I think it's called maybe The Other Being, or The Other Side, maybe. And it's about art, women, and magic. And yes. Any book recs, Shahzia? Any book recommendations from? You're like everything.
I think amazing to kind of read poetry, Rebecca Solnit,
Love Rebecca.
Claudia Rankin, Angela Carter. They will complement so much of what Elizabeth is saying.
That sounds like that.
I had this question. One of the words that you used over and over again is spillage, and what is the beginning of a painting, and how we're interacting with it. And maybe you both can speak to this in regards to your work currently in University of Houston, and where that came from, Madison Garden. The location of that piece of work fed into the story of the work and how people take it in, right? And then how you move that to a different place, how it takes on a whole new meaning. And this idea of art being objects that can be obtained or have value. In this space of this installation, all these pieces can individually say something, but all together collectively have a narrative. Elizabeth, what is your feeling on that in regards to these individual pieces? Where do they move on from here? How does that change depending on the location and the people that it engages? So, that idea of what is art, how is it something that
The question, Shahzia, is about art as object and art in the narrative of the piece in different places. And that's a huge part of this show for me, because it kind of started as, like, if that's my word, spillage and leaking, it started as, how can my practice of painting be like a prayer in every moment? And how can that experience that's ongoing, that's like looping time and looping what it is to be in this world, how can that be an exhibit? How can a painting not be an object? How can you take a painting and lovingly paint it like a lover, and then totally destroy it and take it apart, or remove it from the room so that you can't even see it, or have it looping in on itself, or have it changing ages. It's very interesting to me, since I've always been a portrait painter, to have a body that changes ages and time and mood. I, in many ways, did that because just for my own medicine, as someone who wants to safeguard what painting is for myself. And how do you safeguard what painting is for yourself in this world that we're in. You know, I want to be in the world and have people participate in the work, but I also want to safeguard why I do it and what it is and how it comes to you and then how you experience it and how can that be an ongoing spillage and how can that be a way in which you and I nourish each other, and you know, how does that become how does a painting become a web or an embrace or a ongoing verb, you know?
Yeah, I think again, as I work with many mediums, but it's not that I think about, oh, they're all separate. Like, I think the connecting tissue between that is drawing, and drawing as a thinking tool. And it's a thinking tool that allows me to solve ideas, to arrive to solutions, to think about the malleability of drawing. But in general, for me, like, art is alive, art is changing, it's moving. You know, it's not static, and societies are not static. Nothing has one dimension. Even an object will have several dimensions. So it's like, if you look at multiple vantage points as an artist, then you become aware of all the different binaries, of all the different categories, and all these different dynamics of who is at the center, who's at the periphery. And then I think then it's inevitable that as an artist you will alter that, or you will disrupt it. And that's the beauty, that it's never one thing. It's multivalence, I think, is very important for me as an artist. In every work, or every thought, or every object that gets created.
If I can say something, I see that what both of you are doing, it's crossing boundaries. And I talk about, you know, there's so much fear about, oh, I don't want to cross somebody's boundary. And when I don't cross boundaries respectfully, and sometimes even not so respectfully, nothing happens. So it's about testing the waters. I need to cross boundaries for things to shake things, for things to start permeating, like art permeating life and being in communication with life. And I see you both do that.
To not even cross it, but dissolve it, and to learn how to not see it or need it. Whether you're talking about medium of art or your emotions or your perceptions of a person or an object. We should probably wrap. Thank you. Oh, okay.
One more question.
Elizabeth, just looking at your materials, a lot of them look, you know, we were speaking of decomposition and connection. A lot of them look very sustainable. So I guess I'm curious.
Sustainable in what
being
way?
part of, well, so these all look like cottons and linens and things. I mean, I recognize in art you're never going to be completely sustainable.
I mean,
but
art is definitely in and of itself. I mean, there are forms of it, but I think about that when I'm making it. There's
Yeah, I was
waste.
wondering
There's
how you
always
thought about
waste. There's
Yeah.
waste.
yeah, so I guess I was
There's
just wondering
excess.
how that factors into your process.
Well, I mean, one thing that I did, I mean, I'm painting in plastic, so there's that. It's acrylic paint, and it's plastic, and so I'm a plastic dealer, you know, I'm dealing in plastics, whether I like it or not. But other than that, I always tried to, like, whatever the solution was, I wanted it to be elegant. There's no glue anywhere, you know, there's no tape or glue, like everything is resolved in a very organic and muscular way. And it should stay that way. I wanted every tree stand. Sometimes I had to make them many, many times. I wanted to plop that sucker up and have her just be there and be proud. And all the edges are sealed and clipped and manicured. But yes, I mean, that was very important to me, that like the integrity of the work is that I'm sort of busting open the integrity of like the idea of a painting, and it's spilling out, but it also, in that busting out, maintains its integrity, maintains its like how it's formed. And you had one question. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the idea of mother in a Western Eurocentric idea versus a more global South, Eastern perspective. And sometimes I find there are such strong binaries of, oh, this is a good mother and this is a bad mother, when I talk about my mother too.
Yes.
And I think that the association with the word parent, a lot of people, when you say parent subconsciously, they're immediately thinking mother, female parent, right? And I wanted to ask you and Shahzia about how do you reconcile with the idea of the mother being this nurturing character in this like radical feminist way, but also being able to preserve her identity as an individual and say no or be mad,
Big
know,
question.
or destroy.
Big question. Shahzia, the question is about the idea of mother. I'm gonna not do probably a very good job on the mother, and how do you reconcile as a feminist the idea of a nurturing, loving mother with also the idea that she might not be, or that maybe one doesn't want to be, or all of the ideas of goodness and badness, good mother, bad mother, that comes with that. I think that kind of goes back to the shadow, and also it's a big reason why all the different kinds of men are looped in the stag, because I'm trying to resist that concept of what, especially when it comes like he's the villain, supposedly the villain. How do you take the villain or the other, and how do you resist that good and bad definition? How do all these kinds of men become all together, and then how does that become something that you get involved with instead of see as over there, that's the problem. So I think the same is true for the mother.
For me, it feels more like, it's the tension. The tensions are, there's no one position. For me, the tension is the femininity, the root of that tension. It's the tension between women and power. And I think that that's how society perceives that dynamic, and how often erasure is enacted, by the social forces that shape women's lives. So in that sense, it's that tension that I'm using as fodder for material for my work.
Yes, beautiful. There's no answer really, but it's a question that has to keep being grappled with.
Yeah, that's an incredible question, and taking into consideration that they are very real things, like race is a construct and is also real. Same thing with the mother, either the archetype of the mother. We're talking about crossing boundaries, or not even crossing boundaries, dissolving boundaries, and some people have posed, we have been each other's mothers throughout decomposing, and for some people reincarnation, and on, and going from being a tree to being a worm to being a butterfly. We have been each other's mothers. And I found that I can't really imagine DT, for example, being my mother or being DT's mother. It's possible.
That's an interesting thing to think about.
I have to say that I really loved it, but I have to address, I have literally press.
Yeah, no, it's time to wrap it up. It's time
Because
to.
of the things that are happening in Houston, and my meeting started at 12.
Yeah.
So
Thank you so much, Shahzia. And thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you so much, Shahzia.